Hey kawan, welcome to EDCReady. Today we have a review of this knife. This is the Kershaw Mini Natrix in copper. So this knife, couple of notes, this knife is on loan from my friend named Anas. He is a friend of mine in the EDCM, the Everyday Carry Malaysia group. And he's had this knife for, I'm not sure how long, maybe like a year or two. And it is pretty much well used. You can definitely see some scratches down there. He has definitely really used this knife. I have not sharpened it, so I just want you to know that all the all the cut tests that I've done in my experience is not based off of the factory edge. So if you want to follow the local scene here in Malaysia, you can just check out EDCM or EDC Malaysia on Instagram. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the measurements. Now, if you want to support this channel, you can check out the description down below. I have there some promo codes to thomastools.com.my. You can click the link. You can use up the promo code. I have my Instagram handle. You can check out my Patreon page as well. Okay, so the blade length right now is coming in at right around 2.75 inches. Right where it stops, we have a handle length of right around 3.64 inches. We have a blade thickness of relatively thin, 0.11 inches on my calipers. And then we have a handle thickness of, let's take the bulge right there, 0.4 inches. And then a total width at the widest point at right around 1.21 inches. Next up, let's get a quick measurement of the weight. Switch on my scale here. It comes in grams. It comes in at about 96 grams, which is about 3.4 ounces, right around that. Hold on, you guys didn't see that, did you? There we go. 96 grams, yeah, which is right around 3.3 ounces. Correct, 3.3 ounces. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the review of this knife. So this knife, made by Kershaw. This is made in China. You can see the little stamp there, in China, right there. And let's talk about the blade steel. This blade steel is a D2 blade steel. So D2, at least by my estimation and by my usage of D2, it's not my first D2 bladed knife. I've had D2 before. It is a good, tough tool steel. It holds its edge quite well for a budget steel. The only downside of D2 is that it's not particularly corrosion resistant. It's missing maybe 1 or 2% chromium that is needed for it to be considered a stainless steel. Now, is this a big deal? If you're the kind of person that sweats a lot, this would be a bit bigger of a deal if you don't live in a wet or humid kind of country, you don't live by the ocean. D2 is going to be okay for you. However, for me personally, I prefer a little bit more corrosion resistance compared to edge retention and toughness. So this is not going to be the ideal steel for me. Don't get me wrong, I do have D2 knives, and to be honest, as long as you take care of the D2, it's not going to rust. So maybe once a month or so, I put a little bit of oil, put a little bit of mineral oil on the blade, and so far it has not rusted. And this knife, even though it has been used in Malaysia for maybe a year or two, it has not rusted yet. There's no signs of rusting on the inside or on the inside mechanism or on the blade itself. So that's a good sign that if you take care of D2 well, it's not going to rust up on you. Okay, now thing about this knife is that one thing you'll notice in this review is that this knife has a lot of really nice small details that make it really nice. For example, the blade here. Let's talk about the blade shape. So the blade shape has a nice flat portion here, and then it kind of curves up a little bit. Then you get another flat portion here. In fact, there's a very shallow belly at the back here, and it's kind of a little bit straighter up front here. I really like this blade shape. Not that good in terms of these kind of slicing cuts. It's more of a piercing kind of cut, more of a pulling kind of cut, which I really love. I love a lot of knives I have this kind of flatter profile. Not exactly a sheep's foot, and definitely not a Warncliffe, but definitely this flatter profile. Another thing I really like about this blade, it almost, because if it's straighter profile here, it almost feels like the tip kind of extends out a little bit. This makes it great for, like I mentioned, this kind of box cutter, utility cuts, kind of slices that you need to do. Another good advantage of this blade is that, let me just use this book as an example. Okay, now with a lot of flipper tab knives, right, the flippers actually get into the way of you using most of the blade. But this knife is not too bad. You can really get all the way up to maybe about 75 or 80, but yeah, right about 75% of the blade. Certain knives, the flipper tab will actually be pretty long, and then you can only really cut up to here. But with this, it's pretty small, so it really gets up to here. There's a little bit of a downside of a small flipper tab, which I'll get to later. It has a nice fuller here, and the fuller here is designed so that it kind of flows all the way out. So the advantage of that is that if you get some kind of mark or grime here, you can just like cleaning out with cloth and then push it all the way out. All in all, I really like this blade shape. Another thing about this blade, I don't know if you can really see it, but if you have a zoom in to here, you can see that this is not completely smooth. So it's not like this where it's smooth satin finish, but it has this, I wouldn't call it jimping, but you know, in this, on the side of your coins, you have this kind of like knurling or whatever. That's what this has here. I'm not sure if it's knurling or if it's micro jimping, but that adds some really nice textures at the top here. It doesn't just feel like smooth satin finish, but it has this kind of texture up here that doesn't really give you that much of a grip. It's still quite slippery, but it just gives you that nice little texture at the top right here. Let's talk about the jimping. The jimping here is nice. It is not rough, but it does give you just a little bit of texture. It's not the grippiest jimping. It's not like a Spyderco jimping, but it still works really well. You also get some pretty nice jimping on the flipper tab back here, which acts as a really good blade guard. That jimping gives it just a little bit of friction as well. Now, another thing that I need to mention here is that ZTs and Kershaws have this amazing ability to really maximize the amount of sharpened edge that you need. It really maxes out the sharpened edge to the actual blade length. A lot of knives, such as Spyderco, because of the finger trawl and all that, you use maybe about half an inch or a quarter of an inch of the cutting edge from the blade length. But here, the maximum blade length that you have is the maximum cutting edge that you have right here. Another knife that does that quite well, another knife to show you the opposite of that is the 10 gram, which is that it has like a 3.3 inch blade, but the sharpened edge is a little bit further out from the tip of the edge of the scales here. So it comes in at about 3.1 inches. Not too bad compared to Spyderco's, but ZT's and Kershaw's really maximize that edge to the blade steel. To the blade length. Alright, so moving on from the knife right here. Let's move to the pivot. We're using a T8 back here. Really nice pivot. It is nice and tall. Okay, and the advantages of having a pivot that is nice and tall is that you get a lot of depth in the Torx bit screws right here. So that means is that it's much tougher to strip it out. These screws are made really well. These pivot collars are made really well. So you can really get it's very hard to damage this with a good pair of Torx bit. Another thing I really like about it is that it is non-free spinning. A lot of knives, unfortunately, my ZT-0450 is a big it's a big example of this. You have free spinning pivots, so when you start turning on one side, the other side will turn, and this assembly just becomes a little bit more of a headache. This just simplifies that by having like little hexagonal, or is it it's an 8-sided pivot on this side to stop it from free spinning, which is great. Another thing is that something that caught me by surprise is that the stop pin is actually goes into these holes on either side, so you don't need to unscrew the stop pin to take it apart. Makes it a little bit easier. And then we have T6, T6, and T6 back here. Alright, let's talk about the action. The action here is fantastic. I mean, ZT makes really good action, and Kershaw, as long as it's not speed safe from my understanding, as long as it's not speed assist from my understanding, they can make some pretty good action. So here, I'm just going to show it to you guys. It's great action. In terms of the fall shut, okay, it doesn't really fall shut, but at the same time, it's pretty darn satisfying. The detent is really nice. It has a nice strong detent, which means that as long as you don't have your finger on the lock bar, okay, it's gonna fire out comfortably. It's gonna fire out reliably, and it's gonna fire out very satisfyingly. And even on the close, it's not drop shut. You need to put in a little bit of pressure, even though it's all on ball bearings, which I really like. But it's just a comfortable shut because of that detent click. Just like that. Super nice, really impressed with the detent. A couple of things I really wish they would improve on. Number one is that I wish they had a detent ball ramp, which would make this jump just a little bit easier. And then another thing is that the pivot tends to unscrew itself a little bit. I've put on some blue Loctite, and even then it still managed to unscrew itself. I suppose if I cake the thing in blue Loctite, it might help. It might not unscrew itself, but it's just something it's something that took me by surprise, something you gotta be aware of sometimes. Now let's talk about the lock bar. So the lock bar, this is called their subframe lock. So instead of having a full frame that is cut to have a lock bar, or a liner that is cut to have to be the lock bar, this has a separate piece of metal that is screwed into this side. You can see those extra screws at the bottom, they're screwed in there, and then that creates the subframe lock that goes into the back of the blade right here. Now, what are the advantages of that? To my understanding, number one, you can make the scales out of any material. You can make it out of FRN, G10, stainless steel, titanium, whatever, and then you can still have a steel lock bar right here. Or conversely, you can have something like copper, like in this case, and then you can have the lock bar here. So it kind of opens up new design avenues, so you can make the knife have a certain appeal, a certain look, and then not affect the lock bar. You don't need a stainless steel insert because this is stainless steel. Or you can make it lighter, you can make it out of FRN or whatever, and then you can just screw this in, making it light and have the ability to have a stainless steel lock bar for the added strength. In this case, it's more of a design feature right here. I don't really see it as having that much of an advantage over a regular frame lock. In fact, there's a slight disadvantage which I'll share with you in a bit. But in the meantime, let's talk about the scales right here. This scales has so many amazing details. First of which, it is nicely rounded on all the edges. Second of which is you have some slight rounding on the inside as well, so the inside is not sharp. Next detail right here, you have all these little cutout that kind of creates this kind of contouring that's very nice. The knife is contoured, so if you feel here, there is some slight contouring that you have, but when you add all these little cutouts right there, it makes it even feel more comfortable in the hand. And this knife, despite its size, I have a lot of small knives. I have the Civivi McKenna, I had the Spyderco Dragonfly. This is by far the most comfortable small knife I've ever held. And that's really down to the design of the scales, and then the details, and then the design of the blade. For example, a knife to me is comfortable when you pick it up and then your hand falls directly into a place. For me, it's right here. So my thumb rests on this little down ramp right here, which by the way creates a nice little position for your index finger when you want to penetrate. So that creates a lot of the potential of a lot of downward force when you push in, because your fingers rest here, or when your fingers rest here, it can create a lot of torque that you need to do this kind of push through kind of cuts. So that's fantastic. Another thing is that because of this little ramp down here as well, you can really choke back on it as well. If you need the full length of the blade, you can really choke it up right here and push it in straight through. Fantastic. Another thing about this handle that I really like is that you see this little L cut out here. Now with a lot of smaller knives, right, I don't have that big of a problem. I can squeeze all four of my fingers in the entire grip area right here. But for some people with slightly bigger hands, their pinky might actually slip off the back. So when you slip off the back, sometimes you can kind of have it on, let's say, maybe a sharp point over here. But because of this little cutout, this little L-shaped cutout, this little divot, your pinky has a nice place to like land right here. And this does a few things. Number one, it kind of extends the potential length of the handle a little bit. Number two, having the pinky slot in here means you have a lot more pushing power that can go to the tip of the knife, which I find really amazing and a really well thought out design. Also, it's nicely rounded all around here, as you can see there, nicely rounded all around there. So it's very comfortable to have your pinky there. You can really squeeze down on it, and you don't really get a lot of hot spots in this knife when you push it in. So just amazing like handle design, and the design fits well with the blade. Sometimes you get knives that are kind of boring in the handle and then fantastic in the blade, or vice versa. In this case, they look like they're designed really well to go together. You can see all the lines connect to the blade here really well. Right. One thing I don't like about the scales right here is that I'm not a big fan of copper. Now copper has a particular smell that I don't quite fancy. It's very metallic, kind of smells like blood. And then this kind of, to be honest, this does stick in your hand a little bit. Can you guys smell that? Yeah. So I'm not a really big fan of copper. However, this does give a really nice aesthetic, which now to me it looks nice. Don't get me wrong, in pictures and on Instagram feeds, it looks fantastic. I just don't like the smell of copper. Another thing about copper is that copper patinas over time. So you can see here a little bit, you can see a little bit of patina right around here, right? You can see a little bit of a greenish something, well, it's not rust I think, but it's a patina. You can see a little greenish thing come through the handles where, you know, where moisture kind of gets trapped. And for some people, that creates a nice design. It definitely creates a knife that after some time looks unique to you, because everyone's hands sweat differently and everyone lives in slightly different conditions. So when you hold this over a period of time, it will start to patina to your particular lifestyle. So as a result, this knife over some time can be unique to you. And I like all these things about copper, with the exception that it leaves that smell in the hand, and I don't particularly like that smell. Oh, another thing about copper is that copper can be a little bit heavy. This knife at around 2.75 inches of blade length comes in at about 3.3 or 3.4 ounces. Okay, which is just a little bit heavier than actually quite 1 ounce heavier than the Para 3 lightweight, which is a much bigger knife than this, although that is made out of FRN. You have a really nice, I'm not sure, this is FRN, I believe this is an FRN back spacer. Really nice back spacer. It's not just boring black, whatever, you have some design in there. Now, going to the back of the knife, the pocket clip, I was actually quite worried of this pocket clip for two main reasons. You can see under the clip, you have a lot of screws. You have the screws for the clip itself that kind of sticks up into the clip, and then you have the screws for the subframe lock. So I was really worried this is going to have a tough time getting into my pants, but after some time, after using it for a while, I realized that it's not really that big of a problem, especially if you're left-handed carrying it. You just flip it over to the other side, which, by the way, the clip has a nice little hole here for it to go into, which I really like. It's a nice design touch. Especially when it goes to the other side, you don't have all 4 screws, you only have the clip screws. The clip screws, they're all T6, they're fine. I've never swapped it around, but you know, they look fine. You know, at the end of the day, I think the screws just has enough of a height to overcome those, the clip has enough of a height to overcome the height of the screws right there. Another problem of this knife which I was concerned about is, this is a very pointy clip. It kind of sweeps up a little bit. A lot of good ramp for you to grip and then pull up and then push it into your pants, or just push it into your pants straight. But I was really worried this is going to be hot spotty, but in practice, I really don't feel it at all. It's just the ergonomics of this knife. When I hold on to it, for some reason it just doesn't, I really don't feel the clip much at all. I kind of feel it up in this corner right here, but that's not really a place I really bear down onto. You definitely do not feel this point in your hand. Okay, so with that said and done, let's go into the conclusions of this knife, which this knife really surprised me. I'm not too big of a Kershaw fan. I feel like Kershaw can do things quite well. I'm really into their bare knuckle, okay, but at the same time, I'm not really into all their speed safe stuff. But some of these knives are, this knife in particular really impressed me. You know, it has a good, decent budget blade steel in D2. It has really nice ergonomics, and it has a really nice blade shape. This blade shape is fantastic. You get a bit of belly, bit of flat, okay, and then you have this point that kind of reaches out a little bit. Great for these penetrating kind of cuts, great for these pulling kind of cuts. You have a great action. The only thing I have to complain about this action is that number one, the pivot tends to unscrew it as I keep flipping it. It doesn't have a detent ball ramp, and this flipper tab, which I forgot to mention just now, because it's so small, it has some nice rounded off jimping at the top here, so it makes it a good flipper tab. However, it's not sharp, but because of its size, it's kind of pointy, and once I started flipping this again and again and again, it can kind of cause a soreness in your finger, which eventually I got used to. Has a nice deep carry pocket clip that is very deep carry. Once you have this in your pocket, you only see the top of that clip and not the knife at all. The screws were an initial concern, but they're not really a concern anymore. The only thing that's holding me back from really loving this knife is the scales. I'm not too big of a fan of the copper. I've looked on Blade HQ, they have non-copper versions, but those tend to be a 8CR 13 MOV, which I find to be an inferior steel. So if they come up with a knife like this, in maybe 14C 28N, maybe I don't know, it can be stainless steel or aluminum or whatever. I think I really like it. Yes, you have the Kershaw bare knuckle, but that's just a little bit big for me. I think if they have a bare knuckle mini, which is maybe 3 inches, I would definitely get that, just because of how well I like this knife. But the real star of this knife is the ergonomics and the details. You have a lot of these really nice details, such as the knurling or the micro jimping at the top here. Jimping that gives you traction, but it's not rough. All these nice contouring, all these nice lines on the knife, all these little cutouts in the back here. All this just leads to just amazingly comfortable knife. This is by far the most comfortable small knife I've ever used in hand. And I gotta say, Now, the Para 3 Lightweight is definitely an extremely comfortable hand, but because of the sharpness of the FRN inside the scales, it can be a bit hot spotty. That is a source of discomfort. But this knife is, I really have a tough time thinking of a knife that's more comfortable than this. Maybe one that comes close to that is this guy. This guy is a little bit bigger in the hand. It doesn't have as much details, but it is comfortable by virtue of it being very simple. But this knife is both beautiful in its detail and beautiful in its ergonomics and in its design. Again, so if they come up with a non-copper version, I will be all up in that. And if they come up with maybe one in 14C28N or maybe a sprint run in S30V or something like that, I will be all up on that business. Alright guys, so that's the end of the review. Hope you guys enjoyed this review. Let me know what you think down below. Do you like copper? Do you like the smell that comes from copper? And have you ever had this knife? And as always guys, thanks for watching and stay ready.